Facebook. And yeah, we're going to be talking about basic income. And I hope I don't have to press anything here. I am live. Yeah. Okay. YouTube is just loading up. Facebook is live as well. Perfect. So yeah, so we're going to be chatting a little bit about basic income. I wanted to do a stream a couple of days ago, and then it didn't really work. And now we're back, and I want to talk about some updates. I get a daily Google alert to see what's new in basic income world, and a lot has been happening. A lot has been happening because of the COVID pandemic, and a lot of countries have started giving people cash payments on a regular basis. And those payments usually aren't like a basic income because they usually don't go to everybody. But in some cases they do. And the question in many places is, shouldn't we get away with all this complicated bureaucracy, figuring out who needs the money, and just give it to everybody, and then tax it back later from those people who didn't need it? And that is very much what a basic income actually is. So a lot of people have picked that up and figured that out, and now a lot of people are asking for a basic income in many different countries. So yes, we have a couple of weeks ago in South Africa, let me just take a quick look. The Secretary General of the ANC, the African National Congress, instructed the economic cluster to look into the feasibility of a basic income for the unemployed. So this is would be a restricted system, and certainly in Canada, talks are picking up. I think just in the last few days, something came out. 75,000 artists in Canada signed an open letter to the government, asking the Canadian government to implement a basic income for all Canadians. The call is getting stronger. In Korea, this was a proposal a few months back, or I think at the end of last year even. And just 2 days ago, the New Yorker came out with a really great article looking at the experiment in Stockton. So Stockton in California has been running an experiment where they've been giving 125 people $500 a month. This was working with the Economic Security Project, which is a basic income organization run by the Facebook founder, Chris Hughes. And he is very much in favor of a low level of basic income, sort of half the poverty line. I think that's his proposal, $500 a month in the US. And the idea behind that would be, if it's half the poverty level, it will not stop anyone from working. So there's no risk of making it a disincentive to work. In fact, it would be much better than existing welfare programs, which are reduced as people earn more, which does create a disincentive to work, and everybody gets it. And then whatever you earn on top of that, you get to keep. So it's a very interesting idea. A very good proposal. It is being tested, as I said, in Stockton. They decided very recently to continue the program. What's a little bit unusual about this is that it's being funded by outside sources. So Stockton is one of the cities in California that has very high rates of poverty. So their tax income also probably isn't high enough to fund this on their own. But there's private donors, and as I said, the Economic Security Project, who funded the initial trial, and now private donors have stepped in to fund the continuation, because they believed that it would be sort of unethical to withdraw, to stop the payments now, which was the original plan. Because of the pandemic, it would just be disastrous to all the people receiving it. So they're continuing it. I think the question is, can they expand it? I think that would be really difficult. As I said, Stockton is not a wealthy city, and it's unlikely that there's going to be billionaires who are willing to keep pumping money into it. And that's sort of the main question for basic income is, do we do it at a national scale, and then do we, what else do we need to adjust in the economy for that to work? Just on the news, a couple other things. In Norwich, in the UK, the city council has put forward a motion to become a pilot location for a national pilot of basic income. A lot of people are calling for this. It's in the Labour manifesto. So if the Labour Party would win an election ever in the UK, they would conduct basic income pilots. And one of the biggest advocates for basic income in the world, Guy Standing, he's a British academic, and he wrote a sort of a proposal, quite a detailed document, about 100 pages. I have read it, most of it. I might go through that once with you, just to give you an idea what he talks about, but it's very interesting. He goes into a lot of details and puts the proposal of what a basic income pilot project might look like in the UK. He goes into a lot of details. So, the Labour Party has that was something he actually was commissioned to do by a foundation that advises the Labour Party, something like this. But was entered sort of, or was officially accepted by one of the Labour MPs as a proposal, and they certainly put the pilot projects onto their manifesto. So that's the UK. There's a lot of interest in a basic income. As I said, South Africa and the US and Canada, everybody's talking about this. In Finland, you may know, you may not know, Finland was in the news a lot in relation to a basic income over the last few years, because they've been running a long 2-year trial of basic income, and probably one of the biggest trials in a wealthy country, which is all the other countries. Well, South Africa is a sort of middle income country. We could talk about that. It's a little bit different. They might be in a more similar position to Iran, which has a basic income. But certainly wealthy countries have a very different experience of a basic income. And the level needs to be set differently, and the economic impacts are different, and so on. So Finland was an interesting case because of that. And they finished the trial, and everybody was very interested in it, and sort of the results, I don't know if the final results have been published, but the preliminary results were not that exciting. And I was not surprised. I had studied the setup of that pilot project, of the experiment, and I have read a lot about basic income, and the way it was set up was not in a way that would provide us with any really interesting evidence. However, or at least not new evidence, there is some interesting evidence, which isn't new to those people who've looked at basic income, which is that a lot of people are afraid that if you have a basic income, people will not work as much. And there's a lot of previous evidence against this, that people don't decrease the amount of work. They do, even if they have enough money from a basic income to cover their basic needs. And the Finnish experiment has held that up. So the evidence is growing stronger for the fact that it's not a work disincentive. Even a full basic income that's at or above the poverty level. As I said before, the Economic Security Project is proposing a half the poverty level basic income in order to avoid this question. But I think it's superfluous. It doesn't need to be avoided, because actually the evidence is very strong that it does not reduce work. In a Canadian experiment, Canada has a long history with a basic income, and in an experiment they did, I don't know exactly, 80s, 90s, years ago, maybe it was the 70s. In North America, there was a lot of experiments going on in the 70s, in the US as well. But anyway, the experiment, it was called Mincome, showed that the amount of work, so the number of people who reduced the amount of work they did was roughly 3%, so a very small number. And all of those people were either mothers of young children who spent more time with their young children instead of working, so they had something more important to do than work, perhaps, and students spending more time at school or tertiary education. So yes, the people who work less have better, more important, socially functional things to do that don't earn any money in our current system, and so they make a sort of smart decision to do those things instead of earning money when they can live on the basic income. But the amount of work reduced is very little overall. Yeah, so that's kind of like the news I wanted to just go over, and the general, I don't know, the general question of what a basic income is we might just chat about that. So um, as I said, a couple of days ago, I was trying to stream this. I didn't notice that my microphone was not working, and what happened was I spent about an hour talking to the camera without my microphone, and I wasn't live streaming. Luckily, I was testing the stream, but I was not live with it, and it didn't work. At the end, I found out the audio was off the whole time. My microphone was muted. So anyway, we don't have that problem today, and I think I spend sort of 15 minutes chatting a little bit. If you have any questions, feel free to pop those in the chat. And otherwise, yeah, let's talk a little bit about basic income. So I'm very excited about the amount of discussion that's going on for basic income. I came across it a year and a half ago, roughly, from Rutger Bregman, who's a Dutch historian who wrote a fantastic book called Utopia for Realists, in which he talks about what's the long-term vision that progressives have today. And he sort of said there really aren't any. And he sort of asked, what could they be? And he came up with 3, which are reducing the work week to 15 hours a week. Number 2, eradicating all borders in the world. And number 3, a universal basic income. And all of those 3 will have to be implemented step by step. So when we talk about universal basic income, if it's really universal, it will cover everybody on the planet. That's not likely to happen anytime soon. But the idea of most basic income advocates today is to say, let's implement it in some places in the world. Let's get the sort of, let's get it started somewhere, and then spread out from there. And the same, you might say, is true for no borders. We've eradicated all the borders here in Europe. I travel a little bit around Europe, and it's great. There's no borders. Sometimes you see old buildings that used to be border control buildings, and in most places there's no more borders. Especially if you go to places like the French-German border, which was a problematic border for a long time, and today there's so many little roads that cross that border, and there's no checks. So I think that's really fantastic. And at some point in the future, we may have a world without any borders. We're still quite far away from that. For a number of different reasons. And one of them is the massive income inequalities across countries. So if you would eradicate all the borders, you would have a lot of migration, you would have slum cities around major cities. And this is for this very reason, China controls immigration within China. China is, I think, one of the only countries that does this. Or today, I can imagine it was common in the past. But the reason China does this is because there is a large amount of wealth and income inequality across China. People in Shanghai and Beijing have much higher incomes than in very distant rural areas of China. China is a very, very big country. And so China sort of knows that if they would allow free movement within China, that large slums would form outside of their major cities, as is the case in places like India, which is a similar sized country. And if you go to Mumbai or Delhi, you will find slums surrounding those cities because people come for better opportunities. So that's not an argument against an open border. I think I believe that an open border is the future. It's the ethically right thing to do. But the step to get there must involve some equalizing of incomes across the world. And so one way to do that is a basic income. And a basic income can really only realistically be started at some international scale, so on some usually probably national level, and then spread over time. I mentioned before, Iran has a basic income. I think a lot of people say this is not possible, will never happen. And I say, actually, there's a country in the world that has a basic income. This is very surprising to people. And the Iran, I believe it's the only basic income that is universal or near universal within its domain. so most people in Iran, it used to be 99.9, almost everybody got it, and they slowly reduced it so that only 90% of people get it. But I mean, that's incredible, right? So 9 out of 10 people in Iran get the basic income. When they started, it was about $40 a month, which I believe was still below the poverty level in Iran back then, but not that much. I mean, Iran is not a wealthy country by any means. And unfortunately, there was some inflation, not because of the basic income, but because of the oil market having trouble. And Iran is a major oil exporter. And because they struggled to export oil, the Iranian economy struggled, and the Iranian currency inflated a lot. And now the basic income is by a factor of 2 or something like that. And now the basic income is worth roughly $15 a month. So quite a low level, and certainly not going to help somebody survive who has no other income. But that's really not the point, mostly, of basic income. The point is to lift people out of poverty, and such a basic income can do that. If people are near the poverty line, then it can make that difference. It also makes it less risky to try new things and to change your job, because you know that you can, if you save up a little bit, you might be able to take a bigger risk. And yeah, so I think that's really interesting. There's been some research on this. If you go to basicincome.org, you might find that research. I've read some of it. It's very interesting. They found a lot more entrepreneurial activity in Iran because of this basic income. And I think that's a common across low and middle income countries. This is a very common experience. Entrepreneurship goes through the roof because this steady stream of money that comes in every month gives people the confidence to start something, and also gives them a little bit of capital to start investing in themselves. And I think that sort of leads into discussion of Give Directly. Give Directly is a charity that works in the Horn of Africa and East Africa, mainly in Kenya today. They are a big contributor to basic income research. I think they didn't start out that way. They started out doing cash transfers, which is when you pay a larger sum of money. So they would go into villages in Kenya where the average earning was, between $30 and $60 a month, something like that. And they would give people, like everyone in the village, $1,000, for example, or $500. So it was, more than a year's worth of income as a lump sum, as a kind of investment in the community, just once. And they would say, do whatever you like with that. And of course, everybody would invest it into their lives, making their lives better and things like that. People would maybe buy a domesticated animal, a farm animal. They might improve their house, so they might build a well so they can have clean drinking water. There's all sorts of things that people can invest such sums of money in. That's much more than what they would typically earn in a year. And this is very effective. In fact, the research now has borne out that lump sum cash transfers are more effective dollar for dollar than microfinance. And microfinance is the same idea. You go into very poor communities, you give them a loan, $500, $1,000, $2,000, and then you ask them to slowly pay it back over the succeeding years. And this is very successful. Has started, I don't know exactly, 30 years ago maybe. Muhammad Yunus became very famous with his Grameen Bank in Bangladesh because he did this. And it's very, very powerful because you give people an opportunity to build their own lives up and create an economic system for themselves. And it turns out that if you don't ask for the money back, it's even more effective, which is not that surprising. Obviously, if people don't have to pay it back, they don't have to think about it's sort of a near-term calculation that you have to trade off with the long term when you have to start paying it back immediately. But in fact, the benefits of it being a transfer instead of a loan is so big that even though these microfinance institutes would take that money back over time and then distribute it to other people so that the money could be multiplied essentially by being able to invest and give a loan to many people over the years, it turns out that the grant, giving them money once and not asking for it back, is so much more effective. It cancels out the ability to, the benefit of being able to pay that money out multiple times. It's much more effective. And that's why in the development world now, microfinance is being overtaken by cash transfers. And Give Directly is one of these charities that does cash transfers. But when basic income started becoming a topic some years ago, they decided to try experimenting with basic incomes. And they sort of did side by side. We would give some people cash transfers, some people a basic income. It turns out a basic income is even more effective than a cash transfer. So rather than giving people one-off lump sums, to the value of 1 or 2 years' salary, they would give them a small amount of money every month for a long period of time. And the amount of money was the same. I think they would give them something like $25 a month for 2 years, or the whole amount of money all up front. It turns out giving the money every month is more effective, leads to better outcomes, which sort of makes sense because in some ways it's sort of like a little bit paternalistic, patronizing even, to say, well, it's we have to dole it out in small pieces because maybe people make better decisions that way. But that's sort of where the evidence is pointing. And to me, I think the argument is not that important either way. I think the point about a basic income is that you want to pay it forever. You don't want to just pay it for 2 years. That's not the goal. But that's what they did, and those are the results that they got. But since they realized that this was more effective, they decided what happens if we pay it out longer? Because actually, it may be that we can take large amounts of money, invest them in the stock market, and then pay the interest to people forever. So is that an effective way to do development work? And so what they've started is they go to very poor villages in rural Kenya, and they each village is sort of one group, so they treat everybody in the village the same. Either everybody in the village gets a basic income or they don't, and they have a control group. But they have 2 active experimental groups as well. In one, they give a basic income to everybody for 2 years. And I think this experiment, they started it a year and a half ago maybe, so this is coming up on the end of that 2-year period. But in the second experimental group, they give the basic income to everyone in the village for 12 years. And they want to see is there a difference when it's such a long term versus this 2-year time horizon. And I think that's a very interesting experiment, and I'm donating to that as well because I think it's really great. And that's it's happening, and they have already a lot of very good success stories. So similarly to Iran, they're finding that a lot of people are investing in businesses, starting new businesses, and this is really effective. So that's the trial in Kenya that Give Directly is running, and I think then sort of the real question comes in wealthy countries. We're talking about, as I said, in Kenya, they're paying $25 a month to people. In Iran, it was started at $40, and now it's something like $15, $20. These are very small amounts of money. This is not an amount of money that somebody in Canada, the US, the UK could live on, or here in Switzerland. So what kind of levels are we talking about? As I said before, in Stockton, in California, they're experimenting with $500 a month. This is looking, and as I said, there was a New Yorker article where they look at the early results. It's very promising. So it will be enough to start with a level like that. And this is something that a lot of advocates like Guy Standing also recommend, saying we don't need to start at a poverty level, which means that it covers all your basic needs. We can start at something less than that and work our way up. And we may get most of the benefits already, even if it's a lower level. So I think this makes a lot of sense. And this is, I think, also was kind of my frustration with a few years ago in 2016, there was a referendum in Switzerland about a basic income, and they asked for 2,500 Swiss francs. The Swiss franc is about 1-to-1 with the US dollar, so $2,500 for every person in Switzerland. And I think that is too high. It was not the right place to start. the level was chosen, so I understand why the level was chosen. It's just above the highest state pension level. So in Switzerland, there's sort of like a three pillar pension system. There's the state pension, the employment pension, and your private pension. And the state pension goes to about 2,400 something Swiss francs, equivalent to dollars. So they said, we want to get rid of the pension system, the state pension system, sorry, because there's still going to be the other system, which allow you to live on a similar income as you had when you were earning money in a job. But we want to get rid of those systems. And by the way, that level is the same as the state pension and I believe like orphans stipend and disability insurance. They're all at that same level. This is the social security system in Switzerland. So the top level that you could receive from Social Security is 2,400 something. So they said, we're going to set it high, and then we can get rid of those systems. That's smart, but it meant that the economics of it are really difficult to figure out. And $2,500 per person is certainly enough to live on in Switzerland. I think a lot of Swiss people will be surprised by that. And most people who live here probably wouldn't want to live on that amount of money. The average wage in Switzerland is above 5,000, so it's about double that, the average wage. But that's, I think that's a pretty sensible level to set it at, actually, about half. Ultimately, I think even you might say 40% of the average wage. That might be a good place in general across countries to set it. But in any case, the economic impact of that in Switzerland would have been pretty drastic. And it was turned down by 3/4 of people in the referendum. They had another really dumb thing, which in my mind actually doesn't make it a basic income, which was that if you work, the company was taxed at 100% of your basic income. Essentially, for every employee you have to pay $2,500 a month for their basic income, which means that actually, I'm sorry, I have to give the proposers of this referendum a little bit more credit, because they left it open for Parliament to decide how it would be implemented. But this was their suggestion. Their suggestion was it would be taken from employers, which means that anybody who's employed actually sees essentially no difference. Their income, their salary will be reduced by that amount, because if the company has to pay it to the state so that it can be paid for the basic income, then employers will all have to reduce their salary by that amount. But it also creates a huge disincentive to work, because if you imagine that you get $2,500 if you don't have a job, and suddenly there's a job advertised at $2,600, that means you get $100 a month for that job, essentially, because the other half is given in a circle to your basic income. The rest of the $2,500. So it doesn't make sense. It means actually part-time work becomes basically impossible today. A lot of people in Switzerland work part-time jobs, 20-40% while they're studying, for example. This goes out the window. Nobody in their right mind would would work while studying when they would, not earn any more money doing that. So this is actually the opposite of a basic income. A basic income should be given unconditionally, so that when you earn money on top, it doesn't get taken away from you. So, this was a little bit of a problem in the proposal. I think the reason they did that is because it's very hard otherwise to figure out how do you fund the basic income in the Swiss system. Switzerland has a very strong budget neutrality. So Switzerland is famous for being a neutral country. And the budget has to be neutral. It has to be even. Switzerland is one of the only countries that makes a profit every year, and this is true. That Switzerland makes billions of dollars in profit, and that money is then put into some special funds and whatever, and they do some smart things with it. But the fact is, the idea of running a deficit to pay a basic income would be even less popular than this proposal that came up to fund it through these different taxes. So this is a big problem. I think you could run a basic income on a deficit. I think that makes sense, because the amount of economic growth that a basic income creates over a 5-year time horizon will be tremendous, and the government will be able to pay back a deficit. In countries like the US, where there's already a huge deficit, and which doesn't seem to make a difference for the US economy, you might even say it also makes sense to increase the deficit so we can have a basic income. It will, resolve a lot of the problems that the US economy has. So that could make sense. In Switzerland, I think it also could work. Politically, I'm not sure if that's feasible. I think there's other things. I think you could say the Swiss central bank, a central bank in general, could create a basic income that's tied somehow to their asset, or that they control it in such a way that it's. So actually, this is a pretty interesting way. I think this is a really interesting way to think about basic income. So this is I read this on Medium, an idea which was basically the central bank should make a basic income. And I thought about this, and a lot of people. So if a central bank would give a basic income, that means they would print the money. Essentially, they create the money and then hand it out, right? So the obvious objection for anyone who's done Economics 101 is, won't that create inflation, huge amounts of inflation? Everything will go up in price. It will be totally pointless. Create huge economic shocks because nobody can know how much money is going to be worth tomorrow. This is really dangerous, hyperinflation, right? Well, it turns out that it doesn't look like this would be the case, and there's a really easy way to test it, which would be to say, let the national bank give everybody a basic income of very small amounts, like it could be $5 a month, $10 a month, $20, $50 a month, and see what happens with inflation, because the effects should be pretty quick. You would see them within a month or two, within a quarter at most. And if there is inflation, you can dial it back. And if there's no inflation, you push it more, and then you see what the effect is, right? Countries like Switzerland actually have very low rates of inflation. We've had negative inflation in some quarters. This is dangerous. Deflation. This is really bad for economies for a number of reasons. And Switzerland has sort of between 0 and 1% inflation. I think the official target is below 4%, something like that. I think the target should be 2 to 4%. You want inflation to be above 2%. And the Swiss government, the Swiss National Bank, does not have this target, doesn't have a minimum target. I believe other national banks do have this minimum target. And they saw the hard lessons that Japan drew from reducing the inflation to 0. This is just not a really viable strategy. It seems to work in Switzerland, but there's other reasons for that. Switzerland is a very wealthy country with a lot of money coming in from abroad through the banking system, through the stability of the currency, which is hard to maintain. Also, the Swiss National Bank has to print a lot of money and buy up national assets. I think I wrote this somehow on a Facebook post last year when I figured out how much money this is. The Swiss National Bank has about 150,000 or 100,000, something like that, in assets for every single person living in Switzerland, or every Swiss citizen, one of the two. In any case, this is a huge amount of money, and so you might ask, like, why do they do that, right? Like, because if everybody wants to invest their money in Switzerland, they bring all these foreign currencies into Switzerland and exchange them for Swiss francs, which means that the Swiss franc becomes more and more expensive. So to decrease the value of the Swiss franc, the Swiss National Bank just produces a lot of money, but then has to spend it. Otherwise, it has no effect on the value of the currency if they don't spend it. So they go out and they buy assets on the stock market, and then there's all these Swiss francs flooding into the markets, and that reduces the value of the Swiss franc. This is a way of reducing the pressure. Well, this is fine, but the Swiss National Bank now has this huge trove of assets, which there's no point. It doesn't do anything with them. It's not like a sovereign wealth fund where to invest the money. There's really no point in this. And I suggest that the Swiss National Bank might say, instead of investing the money in foreign stocks, which doesn't help Switzerland at all, it should invest it in Swiss people and just hand out checks to Swiss people, and they would spend the money, and that would also have a downward pressure on the Swiss franc. So this is sort of one of the tools that the national banks in general, their role is to control the value of the currency and to in relation to other currencies, and to control inflation. So these things are slightly different, but they're closely related, because if you think about it, if the value of the Swiss franc would climb and the Swiss franc would become worth more, then this would cause deflation, because Swiss people import a lot of products, and those products would be cheaper when the Swiss franc is stronger. So we would buy more foreign products, and this would because they would be cheaper, right? So this is deflation. On the other hand, if the Swiss franc would drop a lot in relation to other currencies, this would cause inflation, because we would buy less foreign goods. Everything would become more expensive in Switzerland. So this is the sort of connection between these two things. They are closely correlated, but they're not the only ways that these things can affect each other. There's also internal monetary politics. So in a small country like Switzerland, the coupling is quite tight, because there's so much import-export. In larger countries, the coupling is less tight. So in any case, so I think, and my idea, and this is kind of, a pretty radical idea in some ways, because national banks aren't set up to this. Economic orthodoxy says this is bad and whatever. But I suggest that we should pass a law that says the national bank's role, or one of the tools that they get, in addition to the other tools like buying foreign assets, is to pay out a basic income. And they should prefer that over buying foreign assets, because this just doesn't help anybody. It creates liquidity in other parts of the world, but this is not the role of a national bank. So it should prioritize paying out cash to its own citizens. And it can use that as a way to control the currency and to improve inflation. So if inflation should be pushed a little bit higher from the 0 point whatever percent it is to 2% maybe, then a way to infusing cash should do that. Now, the other really interesting thing about this is that it solves a really interesting economic question, which is called production surplus. So we believe in the world today, we can produce a lot more than we are consuming. So this is clear for a number of different reasons. One of them is that things are getting cheaper and cheaper, right? Like especially physical products. They're so cheap compared to the amount of technology and intelligence that's in these devices. They're incredibly, extraordinarily cheap. A microphone like this would have cost thousands of dollars once upon a time, and now it costs, I don't know, $50. So the price of these things is going down and down and down because of competition, because of efficiencies, and so on. And the fact is, if I would say to the manufacturer, which is Shure, of this microphone, I want 1 million of these microphones at this current price, they would love that. That would be perfect for them, because if they're going to produce 1 million more, actually it would cost them less. That's economies of scale. It would cost them less to produce that. So they would say, this is amazing, we're going to produce you 1 million. We'll even give you a discount because you order so many. So in general, when there's more, when this is the case, if you would put more money into the economy, it would improve the economy, because more things would be produced and consumed. So everybody would be better off. They'd be able to take the things that they want in the economy, and things would get better. When there is constrictions, when things get more expensive when you buy more of them, that's when inflation occurs and when you have a problem. So if we gave everybody basic income and they wanted a bigger house, now we have a problem, because there's not space for bigger houses everywhere, right? So you can imagine that if everybody wanted to move to downtown Zurich with their new basic income, property prices in downtown Zurich would go up a lot, because this is a limited resource, and more demand means a higher price. So the idea is, or the question is, are people going to spend the basic income on? Are they going to spend it on things that are abundant, that we can produce more of, that get cheaper when we make more of them? Or are they going to spend it on things that are constrained, that get more expensive when they consume more? And if that happens, then slowly inflation will start. And if it doesn't, then inflation will not happen. And so the great way to test this would be to say, we're going to introduce a basic income, which increases slowly every month. And so the central bank could do this with printed money, or the government could do this with borrowed money, or the government could do it with money that they have from somewhere else. It actually doesn't matter. I think in general, this is a good idea. You would say, let's say in the first month, we give $50 to every person. In the second month, we give $100. In the third month, we give $150. And we start to see the economic effects. It's not a lot of money, and nobody's going to quit their job over this. But it's a way to start seeing what impact this has and whether this is going to, you know, start causing inflation or causing other negative effects on the economy. And within a few months, this is already making a difference to some people for whom that money is really important because they're not earning very much now. And over time, it becomes more meaningful to more and more people. And then you could keep increasing it up to a level that makes sense, where the economy is running the smoothest. I think you would see economic growth when you do that up to a certain level. And that's sort of the level you want to find. There's no point in doing this like ideologically, like or even just picking a number out of the air with the like poverty line, which is just a made up number, really. We don't need to do that. We can just say, let's set it at the level that causes the most economic productivity, that makes people better off, that increases people's health and well-being. These are the targets that we want, and this is what a basic income should be geared towards. So I think I've rambled enough. I'm going to call it a day now. But I might just mention one more thing. There's, I believe, the Scottish, the New Zealand, and the Icelandic government have formed a partnership, by the way, all run by women prime ministers. They've formed a partnership to figure out how do you increase well-being of society, how do you make well-being the core of government policy, and basic income is part of that discussion. And I think that's really interesting. And countries that figure out, how to put the well-being at the center of the economy, those are the countries that are going to succeed. Because right now we've got it the wrong way around. Everybody's thinking about how do we use humans so the economy runs better. This is like absurd. Like the economy exists to serve us, not the other way around. And with that thought, I think I will leave it. And thanks for